Hello, everyone. I'll be presenting my research project in a moment, but before I begin, we would like to know about your knowledge of how climate change is impacting girls and women. A poll should pop up any moment, and please rate your answer from 1, which is no knowledge, to 5, which is very detailed knowledge. I'll give you a few moments to complete that. Okay, cool. It looks like most of you have some knowledge on this, which is really good. Okay, so I'll begin by introducing myself. My name is Monica Urias, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm currently in my second year at CSU Monterey Bay, and I'm majoring in environmental science, technology, and policy. I am a first-generation Mexican-American STEM major, and this is my first time working on a research project. Some things I like to do in my free time are spending time in the great outdoors and learning about the interactions between animal species, climate change, and people. With the support of the Undergraduate Research Opportunity Center and the Correct Scholars Program, I've partnered with Regeneración for this research project. Next slide, please. In this presentation, I will explain the method of how I formulated my research question, as well as discuss important findings. So what is my question of interest? I want to see how climate change and global sustainability affect women's beliefs, feelings, and concerns about their participation in raising children. I am almost 20 years old, and I've been thinking about having children in the near future. I developed this curiosity around what women think in regards to this, and I was actually really surprised to find that there is a lack of coverage on the challenges that women face when thinking of starting a family. So I collected my data using Google Forms as an online survey. The survey was distributed through different networks and mediums, and the responses were collected over the span of 2.5 weeks. The survey was provided in both English and Spanish in order to reach a wider range of participants. There were 32 questions in total, and those who responded to the survey were 50 women from different backgrounds. These women were given the opportunity to share their experience and their perspective on having children either by birth, adoption, foster care, partnership, or by remaining childless by choice or through natural circumstances. Although respondents from the Pajaro Valley were encouraged to participate, people from all other areas participated in it as well. 26% of these were from the Pajaro Valley. You can also see that we also collected other demographics such as the races and ethnicities of each respondent, as well as their age ranges. Although I collected 5 age ranges in the survey, I decided to group them into 2 instead: childbearing years versus end of to post-childbearing years. You will be able to see this in the charts coming up, and this was done to see if there were any noticeable differences.
Hi, Monica. This is Natalie. A couple notes to slow down for our interpreters, but you're doing great. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. Thank you. Next slide, please. So what are women saying about this? In the survey, when respondents were asked about their current thoughts on giving birth to a child, these 2 quotes really embodied the uprising concerns of younger generations and were overall reflective of my results. The first quote reads, "I'm not ready to have children yet. This world is hard to live in, politically, financially, and environmentally." An important thing to mention is that this quote written in English was from someone within the 18 to 24 age group. The second quote in Spanish comes from someone within the 45 plus age group. The English translation will be in the chat for those who want to follow along. But she states, "Es una responsabilidad muy grande y las condiciones sociales, económicas y climáticas no son las más favorables." Despite the difference in age, it's interesting to see how similar views can arise from similar concerns. These 2 statements really encompass the central message of this project and will help establish the focus of this presentation. Sometimes we have to take into consideration how our races and ethnicities play a role in what we believe in and value most. When I was analyzing the results of my survey, I noticed that certain individuals in each race and ethnicity group expressed different concerns when thinking about forming families. For example, one of the individuals who identifies as white, Caucasian, or European expressed a concern for overpopulation. On the contrary, one of the individuals from Asian descent hopes that in the future there will be a cure for pain, suffering, and violence. The last example is from a respondent of Mexican origin who declared her opposition to the contamination of our oceans, rivers, lakes, and terrestrial ecosystems. Hopefully, these next examples will help you better visualize what's happening in this chart. Notice that there are some values on a scale of 1 to 7. Respondents were asked on the survey to rate their concerns. A value of 1 represents not at all concerned, and 7 represents very significant. The rest of the charts will be organized the same way by levels of concern on a scale of 0 to 7. Here we can see that for each race and ethnicity group, the concern for climate change appears to be the highest amongst other environmental related issues. So, as you can see, this data is looking at all respondents within the 18 to 35 age range. Let's take a look at the next chart. So, you may be wondering why this chart looks different if the concerns are the same. Well, the height of each bar looks different because we are now analyzing the data for individuals in the 36 to 45 plus age range. The top concerns across all categories were climate change, pollution, and pesticides. This is true for both age groups. Although there is a similar variability between each of these concerns for each of the race and ethnicity groups, the 18 to 35 group, however, was more concerned overall. Next slide, please. It's quite evident that climate change is the leading concern across all participants. Let's take a look at the first quote here about the consequence of sea level rise. If many cities do become uninhabitable, as she states, the people in these affected areas would realistically have to relocate. This circumstance could eventually lead to an economic crisis and affect people's concerns for financial stability. Considering that this could be plausible, it would be interesting to see if the levels of concern for societal issues, such as racial injustice, economic crisis, financial security, and access to medical care, are parallel to the data we just looked at for environmental and health-related issues. The second quote comes from an individual within the 24 to 29 years of age. She expresses her concern for the future and how unfit it may be to care for a child. She specifically addresses climate change, which further emphasizes that this is a prominent concern to consider when deciding to raise a child. Now let's take a look at a different set of variables. In this chart, it may look very similar to the previous ones, but the only change is that we are now observing data for social and economic concerns. The central idea is still the same. In other words, we are continuing to observe these concerns with the thought of starting a family in mind. The responses used in this chart were gathered from individuals within the 18 to 35 age group. So what can we gather from this data? Well, we can see that for each of the social and economic variables, all individuals in this data set rated their concerns a 5 out of 7 or higher. This tells us that these women are highly concerned on average about social and economic issues. Let's take a look at the next chart to see if there are any differences that we can spot. Now we are looking at the results from the 36 to 45 plus age group. See if you can identify the top concerns. One thing to note before making assumptions about the data is that there was only one respondent for the Asian race and ethnicity group and the two or more race ethnicity group. So while it appears that they have higher concerns overall, we just have to account for the fact that these ratings come from one person. Right away, I can see that there is a decrease in some of these ratings. Those who identified as Mexican, Mexican American, or Hispanic, Latino, and Chicana rated lower for all social and economic concerns than those from the younger age group. Next slide, please. We saw in the last two charts that the 18 to 35 age group were generally more concerned. One of the top concerns people had was having access to medical care. The quote below states, "I worry about the control the government will exert on the medical choices of our citizens. I worry about pollution and toxic chemicals overloading my baby's system." This person is a mother who worries for the well-being of her child, both environmentally and socially. If mothers are constantly thinking about the harmful effects of chemicals and pollutants, it would make sense that they'd give a high rating for access to medical care. Okay, so these next two charts will be comparing something a bit different. They aim to summarize the correlation between the number of desired children and levels of concern for ages 18 to 35 only. We chose to focus on this age range due to the likelihood of female fertility decreasing after the age of 35. As you can see, this first graph is looking at environmental and health concerns. Respondents were asked for the number of children they were planning to have within the next 5 to 10 years. The options were 1 child, 2 children, and 3 or more children. The most apparent judgment we can make is that people who plan to have 0 to 1 children tend to have the highest amounts of concerns. Now let's look at the next one. On this slide, observe the correlation between the number of desired children and levels of social and economic concerns. Respondents were asked the same question and were given the same 3 options. Those who said that within the next 5 to 10 years, they plan to have 0 to 1 children had higher concerns across all categories for environmental, health, social, and economic concerns. Those who said they are planning to have 2 children had high concerns, but those who chose 3 or more children on average had lower concerns for all categories. So what does this tell us? The first 2 quotes on this slide, if you recall, are the same that were introduced to you at the beginning of this presentation. The only difference here is that I added the number of intended children they plan to have along with their age. So you could start to picture how the concerns relate to age and the number of children. Let's take a look at the last quote. The respondent selected 3 or more children. When looking at her data, she rated climate change, racial injustice, pesticides, overpopulation, and food security a 1 out of 7, which is synonymous for not at all concerned. However, she was somewhat concerned with economic crisis, financial security, and access to medical care, which is reflective of the hopes and fears that she mentioned in her response. So what can we say overall about the data to sum up this presentation? I know it was a lot, but the trend that I saw within the data revealed that the lower number of desired children, in other words, if they chose 0 to 1 child, correlated with higher levels of concerns for both environmental and socially related issues. The following slide has some potential questions that can be used for future research if any of you are interested. And I'd be happy to share the survey with you if needed. We can communicate via email. Just reach out to either me or my mentor. Both of our emails are on the slide. Thank you so much for your time and your undivided attention.